Domestic policy is very much caught up in a web of laws and domestic political interests. Every major interest in the United States has a way to influence the way Congress works. The timber industry, or the gas industry, or the chemical industry, or the credit card industry, or the financial industry. They all have decisive influence over certain members of Congress, which they buy through the political system in the United States of what's essentially legalized bribery, if you see it from any other country. And the clash of so many special interests in their own profit makes progress through Congress on anything very difficult. But in world affairs, you can proceed without congressional approval. So, for example, just to pick one out of the air, what should be the United States policy toward Ukraine? So, Ukraine is bordering right on Russia. It has been the United States project to promote anti-Russian feeling in Ukraine and to try to do everything we can to weaken any efforts to build stronger ties between Russia and Ukraine. We want Ukraine to be an ally of the West and to help us weaken Russia. We would like to send heavy military equipment into Ukraine. We would love to carry out military maneuvers on the soil of Ukraine. We would like to encourage Ukrainian politicians to be defiant of Russia. Now, you might pull back and ask yourself, why would we want to do that? Why would we want to provoke Russia by fomenting trouble in the country on Russia's border? No country can tolerate upheaval and interference by a major global rival in a country right on its border. We wouldn't like China to open up a military base in Tijuana, or we wouldn't appreciate large-scale Russian military maneuvers in Quebec on the shores of the Great Lakes. But yet we are constantly poking our stick in Russia's eye by carrying out military maneuvers in the Baltics, in some cases right on the border with Russia. We're also doing the same thing with aggressive military patrolling in the South China Sea. A president could decide, I don't want to do that anymore. We're not going to have a policy of trying to provoke trouble for Russia and China by fomenting upheaval on their borders. We're not going to do that anymore. So he could do that just on his own. He could decide, for example, we're not selling weaponry in Ukraine, government that want to use weaponry to provoke Russia. We won't anymore. If Russia, for example, would like to complete its gas pipeline to Germany, we're not going to object to that anymore. The Trump administration is very upset about this. We would say to ourselves, Russia and Germany made an agreement to build a gas pipeline. That's up to them. We're not going to interfere. That would be a big change in American policy. And that's a change that the United States could make with a stroke of a pen. How about our policy toward Venezuela? We are intensely working to overthrow the government of Venezuela in a variety of different ways. A new president could say, I don't think Biden will, oh, we don't care about overthrowing the government of Venezuela anymore. We're just going to leave it up to the Venezuelans. That could be something that you don't need any congressional approval to do. And that goes for American policy towards countries in most of the world. We could decide we want a whole different policy toward China, a different policy toward Russia, and you don't need to consult Congress for that. So that's why I say a new incoming president has much more leeway in dealing with changes in foreign policy than in trying to change domestic policy.
Do you think presidents necessarily know a lot about foreign policy? Like, do you think they have a comprehensive understanding, like someone like you does, of things that are going on in Russia, China, Venezuela, and the cause and effect of all of it? Or do they just have war generals around them telling them what to do? You have to do this.
I think Joe Biden believes he knows a lot about world affairs. He has served for years and years on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, including extended periods as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's been traveling all over the world. He has met many world leaders. So to a certain degree, he's right in thinking that he knows a lot about the world. On the other hand, he's so much a product of the Republican, Democrat, established think tank media mindset in Washington that he's never pulled back from dealing with individual crises to ask himself the larger question about what should the United States be doing in the world? Why do we insist on being the dominant power in South America, the dominant power in Africa, that we should decide what happens in the Caucasus, that we should shape events in the South China Sea? How long can we continue to do this in the modern world, particularly given all the needs at home? So I don't think that he himself has pulled back enough to ask himself those larger questions. A number of Americans who are highly qualified have done that and would be great members of a national security team for the Biden administration. But I don't expect that to happen. Ask yourself, as you see the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense and their deputies and the people on the National Security Council selected, how many of those people said it was a bad idea to get involved in Syria? We shouldn't have bombed Libya. We never should have invaded Iraq. Go back and find the people who said that, and you won't find any of them being rewarded with posts in the new administration. In fact, having been right about the disastrous consequences of those interventions effectively disqualifies you from service in a future administration, whereas having been wrong and supporting those interventions that worked out so disastrously qualifies you eminently.
And why is that? Why do you think it's like that?
It has to do with our national consciousness and our national self-image. We are a country that always thinks of ourselves as the best, the biggest, the strongest. And we've convinced ourselves that it's not selfish for us to want to dominate the world. It's good for the world. We sacrifice ourselves to help the rest of the world. And sometimes the world doesn't quite appreciate it, but without us, there would be chaos. We feed ourselves this narrative that we are, as Madeleine Albright put it, the indispensable nation, because what did she say? We stand taller and we see further than other nations. It's very difficult for us to convince ourselves that actually we may not have the key to prosperity and security for all people all over the world. That maybe other people want to go in directions of their own and should be allowed to do that. The idea that we should just tend to our own nation, we have deep troubles at home, and rather than tell the rest of the world we have a great example to sell you, you have to be like us. These are larger questions that are very difficult for Americans to grasp. Americans don't like to understand things. We like to do things. And that is what is propelling a foreign policy of intervention and activism. The idea that we should do less in the world just doesn't get any traction in Washington. There's no payoff in that idea. It's always want to do more. You want to sanction that country? No, I want to sanction them even more. You want to give military aid to that government? No, I want to give them even more. There's no payoff. There's no percentage in Washington for saying, why don't we just leave those parts of the world to deal with their own problems and help them diplomatically, but not insist on coercive power. Let's try to do a little less in the world and a little more at home. Instead of trying to build the perfect society in Afghanistan, how about trying to work on one at home? This seems to suggest that there's some limit on what the United States can do in the world And that contradicts something that's very deep in our national character.
Right.